today we're going to talk about something that I think is honestly the most important thing when we talk about property management, and that is our client.
When the market changed and there were some things that beyond our control, our job was to help them in any way that they could.
We want to be able to service our clients to the best of our ability. That doesn't necessarily mean that we want to service all their projects.
You've got to be able to identify where your strength is and where your weakness is.
Our goal isn't to be the cheapest. We want to be really effective. We want to specialize in every aspect of what we're doing. So our goal isn't to be the cheapest or have the most doors. We want to provide the best service in our area.
It takes a little bit more care and a little bit more of a tender hand to deal with a situation with problem residents.
Hey guys, welcome back to Multifamily Manager Pro. T, Skylar, and Chris here with you today. And today we're going to talk about something that I think is honestly the most important thing when we talk about property management, and that is our client. Interviewing our client and how we onboard a client successfully.
If you're going to build a property management business, you want to make sure you're building it in the right way, aligned with the clients that you're working with. Whether you're working for a big company and maybe they handle this side of things, one day you might want to build your own things. I think this is a good topic for any property manager to talk through, not only for the position that they might be in right now, but it's just important to understand a lot of these things because they really do relate to what we do. If you're a property manager and you don't even know what the client's goals are, you're just kind of being sent out to the community, I would highly recommend that you find that out. If you're going to deliver on that sort of thing, you got to really know what people are looking for.
So we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about how to actually interview your client. How do you best set yourself up for success, setting expectations, goals, your pricing structure, right? That's super important. We're going to have some great resources available for you guys too. There's going to be some checklists, some different things to consider. I think we just jump right into it, the interview portion.
Definitely.
And I say this all the time. As much as they think that they're interviewing you, you need to be interviewing them. I think that that's so important. You can't just take in all the business. All business is not good business. And I've seen that happen time and time again where people just get really excited. They're just getting started and they're just like, we need doors. We need to take on anybody. I think that's a mistake.
I think that's true in a lot of businesses, especially in our business. There are fast ways that you can grow just by taking on anything that comes your way. But everything that comes your way is not going to match what you're looking to do or maybe where your skill sets are. Being in this business for a while, we've seen a variety of different types of clients. Not to say any of them are bad or it's not worth looking into, but there are situations that you'll want to decide whether or not it's a good fit for something that your team can provide. T, I mean, you've been around this a long time. We see a lot of different clients with a lot of different goals, right? Some are selling, some are holding, some are more focused on, the brand reputation. Others are focused on the occupancy. It could go a million different ways, I think. And if you don't know what the goal is or what's going to make the client happy with your work, that will set yourself up for a little bit of trouble.
I think it sets us up for something else too. Is this client looking for something that's short term? Are they actually planning on holding on to this property? And Skylar, we've gone through this actually recently, right? Where we thought that we had a long-term hold and things flipped. The market changed. These owners were not in a great position. And all of a sudden we're having to offload this property, right? Completely different set of expectations. We went in thinking, okay, this is a long-term hold, 10 years at least. And then things change. So Skylar, the operating part, that totally changed the strategy and what we were doing there, right?
Correct. And that's some of the things that we kind of got to understand too when we're onboarding as well. What one intention may be one day may completely change the next, and that is going to be driven primarily by forces that are outside of our control. Mainly, what is the market doing? What is happening? In that, yes, we were in a position to where we had an asset that by all appearances was looking to be a long-term hold. Obviously, we're dealing with this as a lease-up, but as we noticed things were kind of coming along, the market had drastically changed out from underneath our feet in a few months' time. We went from pandemic levels of fast and furious, and people were not having issues in filling units and keeping things occupied and things like that. It appeared that towards the end of 23, coming into 24, we started to see a little bit of a slowdown. At least that's what we experienced on our end. So it just kind of speaks to setting the expectation up front. Luckily, you can speak more to this, T. I feel that we were fortunate fortunate enough that we were working with ownership, that we were capable of switching and pivoting as necessary to try to either bring the operation to a close, which was an unfortunate out on our end, or finding solutions to keep the asset going. Did this pan out for us? No. But the most important part is we up front in engaging with that ownership had set reasonable expectations, and they had set expectations with us. So I felt that while it wasn't an unfortunate turn of events, that we had done our due diligence up front in maintaining that relationship with that asset holder.
And that goes back to what you say, Fody, right? That alignment. Like, what are we focusing on?
Well, yeah, and I think that's why that situation, actually, in my mind, I see that more as a win for us because things changed on us kind of overnight. But the reason I think it worked and we were able to work together on that is because we did vet that client in the beginning. That client very much was aligned with what we were doing, and we were committed to making sure that we would get the best result out of that asset. Now, when the market changed and there were some things that beyond our control, our job was to help them in any way that they could. And when they let us know that they had to offboard this property, we did everything we could to make sure they could offboard it for the most amount of money. If they could get some of their investment back, the exit would be a positive thing for them, or at least as positive as it could be. But Skylar, you did an amazing job on that project. I think when we took it over, we were supposed to get like 10 leases. We ended up getting like 50. I think it was a win for us. I realize real estate goes up and down. There's all kinds of changes and things we can't control. But I do think the client would say that it was a positive thing having us in there, even through the change, and being able to kind of navigate that tough situation.
And these are the metrics that we talk about, right? Like, how are we defining success? And yes, sometimes that will evolve. But most of the time, what do you think clients are looking at as far as what they're focused on?
Money, right? So I think money's a big one to them. So a lot of times they're going to be looking at the revenue that we're generating versus the expenses that we're paying. So NOI is a big one, especially for people that are positioning themselves to sell the asset at some point soon. Obviously, cap rates and NOI is going to determine the value. So that's a big one. But I've also had clients that didn't care so much about that. I've had clients that were more focused on having a really cool brand in the area and having people say really nice things about it, having 5-star reviews. And we see different types of clients where we go through lease-ups. They'll say, well, we want this leased up as fast as possible. Just get it stabilized. You have some flexibility on the rents. Other times we'll see clients say that, we're willing to take in a little bit longer, but we have a certain target revenue that we need to hit. And so we need to lease these for the maximum amount. So I think a lot of times they're looking at money. They're looking at how much can this asset make, whether they're looking to sell or hold on and just cash flow it. But then there's a lot of people that will look at like the brand reputation, occupancy, and things like that.
Yeah, and I think understanding a little bit of what their borrowing scenario is, right? Do some people need to get that lease up? Do they need to hit this gross potential rent in a pro forma that they've given a bank? Are they good? Are they just kind of liquid and they can wait and hold out? I mean, these are really important questions that you've got to ask your client. And if they're not comfortable talking about that, that should be a huge red flag to you. You don't need the nitty gritty of the finances, right? We don't care what your loan terms are or whatever. But if it's going to affect the performance of what we're doing or the expectation, right?
That's right.
These are important things that we need to know, because it's not really fair for us to go, okay, you need your gross potential rent to be X. Cool. What's our timeline? And if they go, oh, yeah, it's fine, you guys can take your time, whatever, as long as we hit that number, great. But then if they come back to you 2 months later and go, we need to lease this up quickly, that's where you go back and go, well, we set an expectation. Did something change? So that kind of constant communication of understanding what those things, and obviously that's in a lease-up situation, right? I think I'm just like in lease-up mode, but that's
Right.
in a lease-up situation typically. In a stable property, you're not usually having those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, and recently we've seen people look a lot towards the effective rent, right? And I think you're going to look more at that number depending on the condition of the market. In recent years, it's gotten really competitive. There's a lot of inventory. And because of that, there's a lot of move-in specials. And that can affect your effective rent. So a lot of people will look at that as well. Just kind of comes with the market conditions you're in. And you'll see that number come up a lot more when things get a little bit more challenging.
One of the things that I've noticed is that when I see other managers trying to take on a client, we'll take them on and they'll have maybe like a couple properties under this same client. And then the client will kind of deviate a little bit and they'll do a different type of asset. We've actually just very recently run into this where managing a couple properties for this client, and very recently we've declined to manage their new one. I feel like I was kind of in the thick of it, so you guys have a nice outside perspective on kind of what was happening. But what were the red flags that you guys were seeing that were encouraging you to speak up and tell me like, hey, this is not a good idea?
Well, I could just sense that in our calls, as well as we were doing to help lease up both of these properties that we were working with, there was definitely some frustration, I think, on both sides. And again, this is not saying anything bad about us or them. It's just we weren't clicking as far as what we were trying to do for them and what they were expecting from us. We would come to the meetings very excited. We're leasing up at a very fast pace. We're getting these amazing rents. And it just seems that we're looking at things through a different lens and we're kind of butting heads a little bit on what we're trying to do. One of the biggest red flags for me is just having a lot of people in the scenarios. When a client maybe not comfortable making decisions, sometimes they'll surround themselves with as many people as possible. We call that having too many cooks in the kitchen. It can get really noisy and it gets hard to do our job correctly, right? And this is not something that we just started doing. We've been doing this for a long time. We have strategies in place for different scenarios. But if there's not that trust there, and I'm not saying you just have to blindly trust, but if we're providing you with performance reports that are speaking to what we're doing and we just still don't have that trust and it's just a frustrating situation, we're finding that the weekly meetings are just doing too much, I guess. It just is a sign to me that maybe this is not a healthy, positive situation to continue on. Now, we didn't just drop everything. We still support and work with this client, right, on several other properties, but we knew this next one was going to be bigger. There's going to be a lot going on with it. More people were starting to get involved. And for us, it just didn't make a lot of sense for us to move forward with it.
And I agree with that, Fody. In managing this other individual, some of his other assets, we kind of already established that what this individual was looking for in terms of his performance, what his investment strategies were, and kind of identifying what those short-term goals were, what those long-term goals were. And I feel like some of the glaring red flags that at least I was witnessing on my end was more so that there was becoming this confusion in what exactly were the end goals, right? We essentially had to take a breath and kind of step back and go, look, we were able to facilitate what you were looking for on the other properties that we service for you. As things progressed with this current project, the sight had been lost on what exactly the vision was. Once that kind of splintered off between us as management and then, of course, the asset holder, just trying to kind of realign that. And then it felt like we were kind of falling short of being able to understand what the new goalpost was in terms of how this project was moving forward. And we want to be able to service our clients to the best of our ability. That doesn't necessarily mean that we want to service all their projects. That just means that the projects that we take on, we want to service in the way that we feel that we are able to operate and service and that we have those aligned views. And I just feel that on this current project, we just couldn't get back to that realignment to kind of come to a common path to work our way forward to be able to manage that project. This kind of goes back to not every dollar is a good dollar. And this asset holder would have a better time placing another group in that position to better fulfill his needs that he's looking for, as we didn't see that we would be able to bring about the vision that he was looking for.
You've got to be able to identify for yourself as a company where your strength is and where your weakness is. And I think that saying no is not a weakness. I think actually that's the strongest you can be, is saying no when you know it's not a good fit, when you don't share a vision, when you want the asset to do well, but you just know that for some reason, whatever it is, you're not the best facilitator for that. Having those conversations is very difficult as years go by and you continue to do it, and identifying what your boundaries are, they become very easy. It wasn't a super stressful thing. For me, it was actually very liberating because it was putting the team under a lot of stress. So I think that goes right into, does the client understand and value property management as an industry? I mean, we've had a lot of conversations about that, right, Fody? When we started our company, this was a focal point that I think you and I have gone rounds and rounds and rounds about.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's such an important thing for the client to kind of understand the role that we're supposed to bring. They absolutely have a role in it as well. But I think it's going to change depending on the management company that they choose to go with, right? And they have that right to go around and search and see what management companies bring to the table they're looking for. And I think it's smart of them to look at that depending on the project. We're all not going to be suited for every single project that's out there. So I do think it's important that they value what we're doing so that we have a partnership instead of somebody just kind of barking at us and always wanting to kind of push things in a way that don't make sense for the market, don't make sense for the strategy. It's really important, I think, that you're on the same page. One other thing I wanted to just say on that too, that was something to watch out for, is when somebody is kind of sharing your work around. That was something that we kind of experienced at another time, right? Where they're coming into town. They're taking all of our things that we've worked really, really hard for to put together to stand out as a management company. And they're passing that around to other management companies. And to me, that makes me feel like, well, they don't really value what we're doing. They're not protecting what we're doing. We're trying to do something that's special for you. It's something that you're not going to find at other places. The way that you work with us as a partner is not to share all that just so that you have a backup in case things don't work out. And I also wanted to say that on that, you're right, it was liberating, T, but at the same time, we're still very good friends with this client, right? We're still working on his other projects. It's just that project and that fit was not the right one for us.
A lot of people initially, and I think this is one of those things, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned this before, I don't think you approach any kid at 10 years old and go, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they go, a property manager. Mm-hmm. That's not a thing because people don't know what property management is truly, right? A lot of us just kind of fell into this industry in some way, shape, or form. And a lot of owners, investors, asset managers have an expectation. And you as a property manager have to, again, define those boundaries on what it is. No, we're not just sitting here and collecting rent. That's not the end all of end alls of property management. There's a lot that's involved. Now, how involved you guys are, you've got to dictate, but you also need to ensure that you've communicated that to your owner, right? Are they looking for something that you honestly can't provide? And if they are, then be sure to say, hey, not part of our scope of services. Because there is no one fits all. Like Fodi's saying, management companies out there that structure themselves differently. It's so important that you know what your structure is and you're comfortable with your structure and you're not deviating from it too much because there's a difference between growing and learning and doing the things and expanding your company. But then we've seen so many times where all of a sudden a management company is a landscaping company and they're also doing fencing and they also do electricity. Mm-hmm. We're like, whoa, what? Right. What did you do? And those companies, we honestly see that they start touching a lot of things, but not grabbing hold of one. You've got a finger on one thing. You're not really focusing on it, right? That's right. And I think it's unfair for yourself as a management team and for your client because you want to give your all. You didn't come into the industry trying to do all the things. Property management is very encompassing and there's a lot of moving parts. Yes, knowing and really defining what your scope is so important. And then pricing it accordingly is important. We've had this time and time again too, right? Where some owners are just saying, well, I'm not here in town. I've got this many doors. I need someone to just collect rent and do maintenance calls. And so I'm going to pay X.
Yep. And those are the people that are looking for the cheapest services, right? And I know for us as a management company, you may have a different strategy, but for us, our goal isn't to be the cheapest. We want to be really effective. We want to specialize in every aspect of what we're doing. So our goal isn't to be the cheapest or have the most doors. We want to provide the best service in our area. All of these kind of challenges, I think it is most challenging in the beginning when you're building your business. At that point, you do need as much work as possible. It's hard to get kind of off of the ground when you're first starting in property management if you're trying to build up your portfolio. So I think this becomes less and less challenging as you get more experience. You start to discover like what you're really good at. Then you have enough doors to where you can make decisions on, I think we're not the best fit for this. It's very important in the beginning, even if it is going to be a challenge or a struggle to get through, that you don't take on something that's going to hurt you down the road because we know this, right? That can suck up all of your time where, that time could be used to help build good doors, like good doors that fit better for what you guys are trying to accomplish with your business. In the beginning, this is a little bit harder to deal with, but as you grow, it kind of gets easier and easier.
So let's talk about all these different players then, right? You've got your owners, investors. So right then and there, big stark difference. You've got asset managers. So another layer in between you and the actual owners. You've got your lenders that sometimes we need to appease as well, right? Mm-hmm. In the case of a sale, you've got your broker community. So lots of different players to talk about. For us as a team, I know exactly where I'm supposed to be. I know where Fodi goes and I know where Skylar goes. There's a different way to interact with all of these people. Owners, they're who you're dealing with and they want stability, right?
They do. But it's helpful to know if there's investors on the back end because when you're dealing with the owners, they are often dealing with that pressure from investors, right? If we know that they have to report certain benchmarks to their investors, we can understand kind of their pressure points and how we can help them get through the project as well, because that is something that you don't always deal with, but when it's there, it is a factor that you need to be aware of. Asset managers too, they'll come in and oversee everything, try to point property management and different things in different directions. So you're right, that is another layer that you need to know if it's there, kind of what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. And then lenders are a big one too. So whether they're selling or whether they're just holding on to it, a lot of times lenders will have certain requirements. And we've seen this in recent years, especially where the market kind of changed. People had projected certain rents to their lenders, and there is no room to budge in those situations. The lenders want you to hit the benchmarks that you are going to hit, which is unfortunate because the market changes, right? And sometimes I think, man, if the lenders would just bend a little bit on that as the market changes, right? It seems to me that that would be something that would be good because we're in a dynamic industry where things are changing. But when you have no flexibility there, it can make things really challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the broker community, they are your friends. I don't know if enough management companies get out and get to know their brokers. That's a shame. And I think it puts you at a disadvantage because in all honesty, we get a lot of market data from our brokers. We've got really good relationships with a couple strong ones, and they've been super valuable in just helping us get a pulse on the market, kind of seeing where lending is going. They have a different facet of what's going on. And so I think it's important to get an update at least every quarter. Try and see if they're doing like a quarterly update. Oftentimes you're going to see them out there doing market forecasts and things like that. So if you haven't, I would strongly encourage starting to check those kinds of events out because it will help you figure out how to better position your property and honestly, probably arm you with some really good information, or I say arm because sometimes we need it as a weapon, but we need data points. Some of our investors and asset managers, very metrics driven, being able to say, hey, this is coming from whatever big brokerage company, you're giving hard numbers, I think is always helpful. And again, just educational for yourself, but also helpful in painting a bigger picture for those investors and asset managers and whatnot.
I really like our meetings with our brokers. I get a lot out of those meetings. They look at these assets a little bit differently than we do. I feel like they also get a lot out of it when they talk to us. I've heard them say it's really interesting to hear things from your guys' perspective, but having a good relationship with a broker is extremely valuable. When you do find yourself in the middle of a sale, it is them who is going to be guiding the sale for both sides often. Sometimes one side, but often we've seen it where they're working on both sides. So they're the glue that's holding the transaction together. And they'll have a lot of those really hard conversations. And then those are also the people that are going to either recommend you or not recommend you when the property sells, right? So you want to be on good terms with brokers. These are the people that are helping buyers and sellers trade these multifamily assets. And if they see something in your company, they will recommend you, and that will help you grow your doors as well.
Absolutely. Onboarding the client, I feel like we've gone through so many iterations of this checklist too, right? Because as you meet different people, you encounter different things. One thing that we're constantly looking at is our agreement, our service agreement. Because I remember in the very beginning, we were very like, okay, it's not that complicated. We wanted to make it very simple. And then, unfortunately, sometimes you figure out that, man, I should have really had that in there. We learned a big lesson a little while back when it comes to a sale. We didn't have a clause protecting ourselves for extraordinary services, and we spent a lot of after hours. Skylar, I don't know how many extra tours you did with the broker, the appraiser, the lender, the buyers. We tracked a ton of hours there. And how many times did you have to notice these tenants for inspections?
Quite a few times. It's a topic of a conversation. It's like, hey, should we ever have to go into a short-term strategy? How are we going to go about handling this? I mean, again, we never want to paint doom and gloom with any of our people, but we also want to set the realistic expectation of like, hey, if this doesn't go your way, how are we going to proceed with it? We're going to do everything within our power to make sure and ensure that it doesn't. But let's say there are some extraordinary circumstances under which you have to sell. I mean, we never know. It could be anything from the market changing. It could be something as simple as a partner passing away, right? There are things that happen on a day-to-day basis to which I feel like during this onboarding process, it is imperative to ask these guys like, hey, even on a long-term financial strategy that you have with this asset, let's look at some of the possible worst case scenarios and how would you expect us as a management company to handle those, and then under what circumstances would that be an extraordinary circumstance for that management company to receive additional compensation for those extraordinary circumstances. These are things that should be brought up and should be considered. As you had mentioned before, to start out as this should be a fairly straightforward agreement, but as things progress and as we've seen over the last couple of years, the dramatic change in the market, feel that it's more important as a management company, you're asking the right questions for scenarios. Sure, they may never happen, but it's like needing a fire extinguisher and it not being there, right? There are definitely conversations that need to be had, because the thing is if things go to quote unquote hell in a handbasket, how is it that we are going to pick up the pieces, and what is your short-term strategy at that point? How does management play a role in meeting those needs?
Yeah, and Fody, I'm going to kick it to you, because I know one of the other big things that we talked about was a kind of a confidentiality clause, right? You touched on this a little tiny bit, but I kind of want everyone to understand why. And as you guys keep navigating our site and checking out the resources that we have, I think it'll make a lot of sense as to why this material gets to be proprietary. Fody, I mean, that was your thing.
It is. I think for most property managers, you're right. We don't wake up at 12 years old and say we want to be property managers, but somehow we find ourselves in this business. And I know for me, I love it. I'm passionate about it because I love what we do with these assets, right? I love the fact that we have these long-term relationships and we have the ability to do something really great with these communities. That being said, I really want to get good at this. Everything that we're doing, from the marketing, I want it to be advanced. I don't want our competition to be doing the same things that we're doing. Our leasing, Skylar can definitely speak to some of the things that we do outside of what you'll find at normal management companies. T has so many connections where we live. She's got so much knowledge on the broker side, the construction side. What we do is very, very valuable. And we spend a lot of time building our skills and building our resources and building things that we need to really do a great job at this. So the last thing I want is a client to come in and say, okay, I've got all your stuff now. I'm just going to hand it out to all your competition just in case I ever want to kind of leave this situation, I could do what I'm doing here over there. Now, you said it a lot of times, T, like you could give them the recipe, right? And can they cook it? Probably not, but it still doesn't sit right with me. We've put all this time, effort, and work into building these systems and strategies that I think it needs to be protected a little. In my opinion, we're happy to give you these strategies. We're happy to work with you on them. I think out of respect for the situation, it shouldn't be just handed out to all of our competition. And so we try to protect that in our property management agreement. It's not to say that we're not giving our client the things they need to understand what's going on with their properties, but at the same time, we've also had clients that say, teach me how to do this and teach me how to do that. That's another thing I'm not 100% on board with. I have no problem explaining what we're doing, making sure you understand all of the KPIs and all the efforts that are going into it, but you don't go into a doctor's office and ask him to teach you how he's going to do the surgery or whatever, right? What we try to do is very, very specialized. I think most people in this business are going to try to be very, very specialized. That's why we have this Multifamily Manager Pro, so that people can get into this business, get their hands on some resources, some training, and we're always learning, right? So we don't have all the answers already, but we're constantly building on our stuff, and we just want to protect that, right? We don't want to give it away to people that are not doing the things that we're doing.
Absolutely. We could go on and on about a lot of this stuff, and you're going to find a lot of these resources on our site. Anything that we're going to go really, really in depth on, I feel like deserves its own episode. So we'll probably have to do that at some point. But one of the other huge things that you want to do when you're onboarding the client is walk the property. Do a property condition assessment, right? This is where Skylar and I get to have so much fun, and we're actually walking around everywhere, all over the land. And sometimes the owner doesn't even want to go, which is so interesting to me. And that's fine, because again, it depends on how things are structured, right? If you've got hundreds of units and they're like, yeah, whatever, I just need to make a change in management, then okay, fine, not a big deal. But as management, you've got to come in and you've got to boots on the ground right away, because fresh eyes see something every single time, right? I've walked with other managers where we were just consulting. They're still going to be there. And I'm like, oh, did you see this? Do you know how to handle this part? And they either A, didn't see it because they walk by it every single day, and so we get blind to things, or B, they didn't know how to handle something. Property condition assessment is huge. Skylar loves it when I make him go and do this, because he gets so many steps in. You probably should start wearing a Fitbit, actually, just to feel good about,
Possibly.
how far you're walking, like Great Barrier Reef kind of mileage on there. One of the other things that the clients like to talk about, but sometimes it's a difference, I think, in terminology, and it's the financing and budgeting. We go back and forth on cash versus accrual. We have that conversation a lot more than I thought we would.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's definitely some people that prefer cash, other will prefer accrual. Now, it doesn't make that big of a difference on how we're entering things, but it will make a big difference on how you're reporting things. And I know a lot of the bigger communities or bigger investment groups, they do look at accrual. I love reporting in cash because I love seeing exactly where things are at every month. But with accrual, there is some more complex things that go into that you need to kind of understand when looking at the reports. It's not what it is just at first glance. If you look at revenue, you may have not collected all of that revenue, so you need to look down in the accounts receivable columns. It's just a matter of understanding what they're used to and getting yourself set up to not only enter things in your system that way, but also be able to report on that. For example, for our clients that prefer accrual, we have an additional cash flow report that we create that kind of goes into detail on all of the things they need to know to see exactly what was collected, what's still owed, and all that. So just setting yourself up in a way that helps you give them what they're looking for in a way that makes sense to them and you.
Do you guys prefer onboarding a new one, a lease-up, or a stable?
I love lease-ups.
You like the lease-up.
Yeah.
What do you like, Skylar?
That's a very loaded question, right? Both of them have their own set of challenges. Personally, I'm more along the lines with Fody on that one. I do have a preference for lease-up. Part of the reason being is that we get to take it on fresh as a management company, right? We're the ones putting those bodies behind those doors. We're the ones ultimately making those initial decisions as far as how the property is going to operate. Whereas when we take over an existing stabilized property or one that's probably needing some assistance with stabilization, there are some present unknowns, right? We don't quite know the residents that had been placed there. There are a few more unknowns. To that end, lease up, obviously. We have a little bit more control. We have things that are typically still under warranty with the builder. I feel like we have a little more control in terms of handling that asset versus taking on something that's already been stable.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things to look at there, right? In a stable property that's already established, you want to go through with your owner and make sure that you're legally compliant. And I'm not saying that you just have to assume that that's not happening, but it's good to review leases. I know that a lot of us use like an apartment association or some sort of template, and we just kind of go, okay, well, it was updated in 2022. That should be good. Yeah, it's already 3 years now.
Right.
And a lot has changed. I know in Nevada, we have legislation every 2 years, and there have been changes every session that have affected leases. So are you reviewing those kinds of things? Because this is the chance to kind of clean up and help streamline some of those issues when you come into a property. That's your chance to go ahead and clean up issues and just make sure that you're all up to date. I think those are important things to do when you're coming into a stabilized property, because sometimes we get a little lackadaisical about it, and it's dangerous to do that. We want to make sure that we're always compliant, that the property is in good standing with all the paperwork. So I think that that's really important. But I like that you guys are like, oh, lease up, because we get to start it ourselves and do it our way.
It's a different beast, though, for sure, right? Like, you have to structure your team differently. If it's a lease up, it's great. There's people already in there. I'm sorry. If it's a lease up, there's nobody in there. So you're going to have somebody having to do showings all the time. You're going to have the phones ringing off the hook. I mean, it's a whole different beast, right? Whereas it's stabilized, there's people in there, but you don't really know what's going on. And to your point, T, it is really important to dig through all of the leases once you take on a property. This is why we have a setup fee, right? Because we're going to go through everything. We've learned so much from doing that. I think the last one we took over, we found out the managers weren't doing a security deposit. We've seen things where they weren't filling out the concession addendum, where somebody defaulted and left. We had no ability to go recapture the concession that was given to them. Or even things like it's a 30-day or a 60-day notice for them to leave. People write it differently. Or they just don't even fill in the field on those apartment association leases, and then you've got problems there. And I think that property walk that you talk about is so important, not only in the beginning, but so important to always walk your properties. You're going to see things, right? You're going to see things that will help you, help the community. And a lot of times, like you said, T, fresh eyes on it, you're going to notice different things. And it's not always, say, the community manager's fault. If they're there every day, they're getting used to things. They're not picking up on some of the things that somebody would if they're coming to the property just at a random occurrence, checking things out. They might see things a little bit differently. But you can't run a property management business just from your office. You have to go to the properties. You're going to see things that you need to know.
Some of our owners can be a little needy, and you also have to figure that out when you're establishing these expectations between the two of you. I would say that asking how often and how the method of communication is just so important. We're covering so many topics that are incredibly important, but this one I feel like can go off the rails very quickly, and you'll find out very quickly if your owner is a little more high maintenance or if they're just like, it's cool, I hired you guys, go on and I'll talk to you in 3 weeks. There's two different kinds of owners there, and I feel like lately we're with the more high maintenance.
Yeah, if they want to text every time something happens, if they feel like they can call you at 9 o'clock at night, you definitely want to establish that early on so you know how to communicate with them. And if it doesn't fit what you're looking for, that's a sign, I think, right there.
Yes, don't give in to that stuff, because as much as property management it's something's always going on property, and there are absolutely times where you're going to get that call at 10 p.m., 1 a.m., whatever it is. It shouldn't be by the owner like on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
You can't do those kinds of things. Maintaining your mental sanity is really important as a manager, and it just makes you a better manager. And honestly, it's a business relationship. This is where you guys both need to respect each other's roles as the owner and as the manager. And again, this is why it's really important for people to understand that this is an industry. This is a real business. We're going to set expectations accordingly.
When it comes to onboarding, I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see, people blindly taking over a property. So let's say your owner that you're working with has purchased a property and you're going to be taking it over. I would say that it's very, very important for you to go there and meet the management company that was managing it at that time, understanding what they're doing, understanding some of the things that they're struggling with, and some of the things that are going really good at the property, I think are very, very helpful. We've seen this several times in the past where an owner will sell, they'll bring in a management company, and they have no idea what they're doing, right? Because they didn't even sit down and talk to the people who have been running the property for years. And so they're going to miss a lot. They're going to make a lot of the same mistakes that were already made just because they didn't sit down and have that conversation. Anytime we've taken over a property, we're going in there, we're meeting the management company, we're finding out what they're dealing with, trying to just keep a good relationship. I know that we've sold properties, and Skylar still has great relationships with those community managers. And I think that's important. We can help each other. We can understand what's going on. And if we don't, I think it can lead to problems. If you're taking over a property, definitely find out what's going on. You could have people in there that are going through evictions. You can have people in there that are causing problems for the community. But if you don't know, you're just going to find out the hard way rather than just learning from somebody that's already been there dealing with it.
Yeah. Just be friendly, right?
Yeah.
It's not sometimes you keep the property and sometimes you don't, and you can't take it personally. I think that that's a super good inside tip kind of thing.
Yep.
Having that communication. The other things you want to maybe sometimes help educate your owner on is management software. They're coming to you obviously for a reason. They don't want to self-manage it. And maybe it's a time thing. Maybe it's just whatever. This isn't a family trust thing. Whatever the situation is, they are not the expert. So it is up to you to decide and help guide that ownership into saying, okay, this is the system that would work and make sense for your property. Your property management systems, you've got to have all that stuff in place. And, there's a couple big ones out there, and whatever you use, fantastic. But also make sure that the owner knows what you're using and the kinds of reports they can expect. Or is there something specific? Because just as everyone does things differently, all these management softwares are a little bit different. And so some reports you can pull from one particular kind. The other software doesn't allow you to pull it quite that way. You just have to kind of know those things and be really comfortable with whatever resources you're using to give good information over to ownership. Typically, we try not to involve ownership very much, right? So this is a very on-the-ground thing.
Yes, that's correct. We would love to expect that all our residents are just going to be absolutely amazing, right? They're going to pay their rent on time. There's going to be no issues. You can't say that none of us have ever heard of a noise complaint, a parking issue. I mean, even run-of-the-mill simple stuff. There are some times where rubber meets the road as far as day-to-day operations. So yes, it isn't something that we generally like to touch base with our ownership group on, and for a multitude of reasons. At the end of the day, the ownership typically is concerned with their asset, not necessarily an individual residing within their asset. It takes a little bit more care and a little bit more of a tender hand to deal with a situation with problem residents. That is something typically that we we like to handle as management, only if it becomes something that puts the asset at risk. Is that something that we want to bring forward towards ownership? So in terms of the problem residents and things of those natures, we have on a previous asset of ours a situation with an individual that has caused more than their fair share of problems. We're the exiting management group, or if we're the management group coming on, that is part of the interview process of that asset and that ownership, right? Because it is very telling of how that ownership is feeling about how their asset is run. We did have a scenario in which we are still working with the management team on providing them information and have been very upfront about the scenarios in which surround that particular incident and individual, because we can never anticipate how anybody's going to act. And that goes from ownership to residents to everything in between, which is again to why this is in and of itself a challenging career path for anybody who wants to be involved in property management. We just want to make sure that we're handling the situation as best as we can, and we tend to not want to involve ownership unless it becomes an absolute necessity.
Scenario is a good word for having undercover cops sitting outside your building waiting to bust somebody.
I mean, hey, I feel that anybody that's been in this business for a period of time can paint their own stories into some of the situations that they dealt with, residents in certain situations. So I will let your imagination run wild as to the scenario that has been being dealt with. That just goes back to there were certain scenarios or certain situations under which we were handling that in which ownership did need to be alerted to, right? Once we step into that liability realm where it's outside of management and it could potentially harm the ownership, and this goes back to our fiduciary obligation to protect the assets that we manage and the individuals that we manage them for.
Yeah, this is when if I have to show up on property, it's all bad, right?
That's right.
Like it's not good when I have to show up because there's a legal implication there. Communicating and understanding those things, again, just be very upfront with ownership, right? But you've got to be very confident. I've actually recently, we had an owner go, oh, well, just throw money at them and just have them leave. I'm like, yeah,
Not how it works. Yep.
not quite.
Sounded good.
Sounds good. Sounds
Yep.
amazing. Actually, would be super efficient. Can't do that. Every state has different eviction processes, and you need to be very familiar with yours. Whatever's happening with the tenant is whatever it is, but you need to be on very sure footing when you're talking to an owner and having to relay information like that. And most of the time you're going to get an attorney involved, right? Maybe the owner has a real estate attorney, or you guys in your company have true and blue real estate attorney that you guys go to and refer to all the time, which is good. I think you should always have a reference like that. Having that experience and understanding the process and being able to speak to it very clearly to an owner is really important, because again, when you're dealing with these different legal implications, you want to make sure that you've got all of your ducks in a row, because this is not the place where you want to try and fake it till you make it. That's not it.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I think we don't go running to ownership like right away is because we're trying to present solutions, right? We don't want to freak them out with every little problem. We're going to have problems in this business. And as you go through them more and more, you get more and more solutions on kind of how to deal with that. I mean, absolutely. Like Skylar said, if it's affecting the asset in a negative way, then yeah, that conversation needs to be had. But if it's something that can be remedied, something that you can fix, there's nothing wrong with coming to them with the solution and just saying, you know, this is how we were able to correct that issue. They'll appreciate that rather than getting their phone called every time there's a little issue.
Yeah, that's why you're there, right?
That's right.
You're the expert, I swear. One of the other little nice nuances that sometimes we forget is the resident relation portion. We're so busy, like we're onboarding this client, we're trying to get all the expectations met, we're doing all the things, and then we're like, oh yeah, the community. What do we do?
Right.
What is going on over there? What's kind of their vibe? And I think that's a really interesting one, because we have some owners who, as Fody had mentioned, they're really conscious about their community. They're in that long-term hold. They want to maintain good retention. They're not all about every single renewal, I need you to increase rents by blah. Like, it's just a different kind of scenario. And so they're vested into the community. Others, maybe depending on the door size too, they don't really know.
And this one's really important. This can determine whether or not it is a success or failure when you take over. This is not a business without the residents. You've got to have residents paying rent. And in order to have that, they've got to be living there and happy living there and possibly renewing and staying, getting in good with your residents, letting them know, hey, I know this is a transition. We're being open and upfront with you guys about what's going on, but also we're here to make sure that it's nice and smooth transition. We're here for you guys. I think is important because your relationship with them will determine whether or not this goes well. We've seen cases where management companies have taken over and residents leave because they're worried about the future of the property. They don't know what's going on. Is the property being sold? They don't like the way the new management company is coming in and not telling them anything. So I think it's really important when you take over to get out there, meet your residents, maybe have a little event, but somehow get in front of them and just let them know you guys are there to support them.
Ensuring that your owner knows why you're doing that, it makes sense, right? But sometimes we have to kind of spell those things out, right? Like, hey, we want to hold a little event. And they might go, why? I've never done that before. Why would you budget for something like that? What are we doing? It's important to explain those things because this is what's going to end up helping your revenue line, your NOI, all those things, just having that constant touch. I will tell you, on a project, I had a partner of mine coming through and we were making a walk, and every single person that walked by us said hello to Skylar, every single tenant. And Skylar greeted them by name. And my partner was like, does he know everybody in the building? I'm like, yeah, of course he knows everybody in the building. It helped because we were getting those great reviews, online reviews and things like that. I'm pretty sure had something to do with how the rest of that deal went, because it was really important to maintain that relationship, because sometimes ownership is a step or two removed from the property. They don't remember that the people there paying their rent on time are making it so that we can go do the things. So having your Skylar and having your Skylar train mini Skylars is super important. Mm-hmm. Right? I know. Skylar's like, he wants to change his name all the time. He says it like every 2 weeks. He's like, my name's not Skylar anymore. Call me anything else. Call me Tyler. Call me Taylor. She said something else. And I was like, dude, you're okay. It's okay. They love you.
No, but it does bring up a good point, T, right? Retention could be something as simple as management knowing what resident is behind what door, right? This doesn't necessarily mean that you have an event and let's say that you don't have an ownership group that quite understands hosting an event or doing something for the community, things like that. Maybe they don't have the budget for it, but I mean, again, us as property management, us being there physically, yeah, I feel that it is just that one more step is that even in larger properties and things like that, I feel that it's very important that whether or not you have a single individual on a smaller property or you have an entire leasing team on 300-400 units, right? I feel that anybody that got moved in, moved out, anything like that, it's extremely important to have that human element. And it does. It's that extra little step that nobody ever thinks about. But the fact that people can be remembered by name, I have had incidents in which residents are like, I didn't think you remembered my name, things like that, just to treat them as being non-transactional. Because yes, this is transactional, right? You're signing a lease, you're signing an agreement, you're agreeing to pay your rent every month. And sometimes it can be very clinical. So I feel that that little portion of it can help. And then also it just kind of gives you insight, a little more of that interviewing process with either the management company that's coming off or that's coming on, right? You can get a little more insight as to how the ownership feels about the asset, right? Some of them are just looking to, I want to have a certain amount of occupancy. Their financial goals are short term, right? And for those, that's all fine and well. You know what I mean? We can assist in a multitude of ways, but I think that all three of us can safely agree that we do appreciate more of the long-term investment strategies, the investment in our community, the understanding and the will and the want to provide things to the residents to show that we're here in the community and that those ownership groups kind of share that vision in mind with us. That's not to say that sometimes there are ownership groups that may have had that in mind, that their long-term investment strategy turned into a short-term one. That again goes back to the conversations of knowing your brokers in your area, knowing some of these different avenues, especially in the process of a sale. Who is this new ownership coming on? Are they going to share in the vision that was left? Are they going to change it? How are they going to change it? What are their strategies? Because again, too, at the end of the day, this interview is a two-way street between ownership and management and making sure that we're a proper fit for each other, regardless of the short or the long-term financial strategies that they're looking for.
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to say on making sure that you're good with your residents is this will help you in a variety of different situations, the good ones and the bad. T, you just recently got done with an eviction. And what happened at the end of that eviction? The resident gave you a hug, right? Because we work with our residents. Like, even if we have to do something like that, we're not the bad guy. We're here to try to help you work through things. I mean, T, you've done a lot of housing assistance and things like that. So just being a human, I think, to your residents, again, is going to go a long way. Whether your property has an office or not, you can go out there, you can spend a day out there, shake people's hands, meet them, just let them know that you're in there with good intentions. And like I said, whether it's good or it goes kind of bad, I think it puts you in a better place.
I know that one was rough too.
It's always rough, right? And yeah.
We all know that sometimes there's the ones you're like, yes, you've had to leave because you were rude to everyone. That is the least glamorous part of the job, right? It is when you have to talk about someone not being housed on your property anymore. Then you don't know what happens after that. It's not your responsibility, but it's still tough. And I think that for ownership, one of the other things that, gosh, you've got to be on the same page on, how are you going to market your property? And oh my gosh, buddy, don't go crazy, because this is his like little sore spot here. And we do a little bit more. I will say our company, because Fody does have this remarkable marketing background, we speak to this a little differently. I get to kind of brag about it because I know for a fact, having experience with a lot of different management companies, big and small, corporate and private, Fody's like a little ninja in there. So it's cool because you guys will actually be able to take advantage of some of this stuff. It's one where I think it's a very important conversation to have with ownership. And I have to reel Fody back in sometimes because this is where his passion is, right? Again, a little bit different for us. But Fody, what are some of at least the basic strategies and questions we should be asking potential owners when it comes to marketing?
So this is definitely not the marketing episode, right? So, but I mean, it is part of onboarding. You want to understand where things are at. Just a very broad view. Are you guys on the ILSs? What ILSs are you on? How much are you spending on the ILSs? What are you getting from each of the different ILSs? Just understanding where your property is being marketed and how it's being marketed. Are you guys using social media? Are you using the search engines? Do you have a community website? Just really gathering all the information and know what you have to work with. And then once you have that, then you can kind of look into maybe what can be added, what can be cut out or modified to make sure that you have a marketing strategy that works for what you're trying to accomplish. Was that short enough?
That was pretty good. I'm actually impressed. I was going to let you go on for like another couple minutes, but that was good. So those are the big main questions you should be asking your ownership, right? Like, do they even have a presence? We have encountered owners that had no advertising.
And then they're completely curious as to why they're not getting any leases. These are the same owners. Yep.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
That's where I see Fody, like his eye twitches a little bit because he's like, oh, wow. Okay. What's the leasing strategy, right? Very involved. We're not going to get that involved. Skylar, we're not going to get that involved.
D, we're not going to get that involved. Just piggybacking off of the marketing strategy. That's why I feel that we are super successful, right? I do like to say it all the time that Fody sets it up, I knock him down. He makes sure that I have those leads to contact. I run with it from there.
Covey and Shag.
Yeah, exactly. We are the dynamic duo when it comes to marketing and closing. But yes, the leasing expectations, where we are looking for qualified candidates. There's a few different main reasons for that, right? Occupancy, we're not looking for defaults. We're looking for the ability to repay rent. And again, it goes back to that fiduciary obligation to our ownership. So as far as the leasing activity goes, with Fody's tremendous marketing, we are dredging up quite a bit of lead activity. Does that necessarily translate into qualified leases? And the answer to that is no. No, it does not. What that means is that Fody has now provided me with an abundance of resources in terms of contacts. It is now up to me and my leasing team to ensure the appropriate placement is happening in terms of income, in terms of any of those guidelines that you need to meet and follow when it comes to your leasing activity.
Gosh, we covered a lot because, again, this is a super important topic, right? I mean, you've got to find a client that works best for you, your company, that you really actually want to work with and partner with. We've got some great owners, and then I've had some not great owners. You're going to go through that, and it's growing pains. And I think it's a good thing, because every single time I've had a not great owner and figuring out how to gracefully exit a situation. Eons ago, I was at a different brokerage and we got fired pretty hard. It was very interesting to see my senior person at that time just kind of go, well, screw that guy and blah, 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 blah. And I was thinking to myself, how did we lose them though? But how? What happened? I never got an answer. And at the time, I wasn't in that senior position to kind of really understand the nuances of what was going on. Funny story though, that owner has since come around. I have seen him. I know him. We may actually be helping him out in a little bit here, but it's at the end of the day, you've got to keep it professional. You've got to keep it within respectful bounds, right? I mean, I feel like that's so common sense, but at the same time, don't disrespect yourself as a business. Don't disrespect your team and their time. I think that's my biggest thing as Fody and I formed this company and gotten people on with our vision. It's because I feel like our team knows that we won't waste their time either, right? We're not here to make ourselves miserable. I can't do it. And so it's really important. So take the client interview process seriously. Really put some time into it. We've got a checklist for you guys that I think it's a pretty good outline, but you're going to come upon scenarios where you're like, I'm adding that to my checklist. I'm adding this. I hope that we are able to provide a good base, and you guys can take it and run with it and go out there and find amazing clients and know what to do with not so amazing clients. So
This is important.
yeah, I think that's it, guys. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and we will catch you all soon.